I do not believe that there is a so-called silence from the scriptures on the topic of abortion, but rather that some refuse to hear from the scriptures themselves. There is something that all of us have built into us that has been overlooked at some extent in this debate. It is our conscience. According to the Bible, the excuse of the Bible is silent on any matter is not really an excuse when your conscience is speaking loud and clear. Romans chapter 2 verses 14 and 15 says, even Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they have known His law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them they are doing right. All of us have been given a conscience to act as a law within our hearts. If one's conscience is saying no to abortion, then if you reject your conscience, it will lead you to think beyond that you know are wrong. I've heard it been said that killing the very first time is hard, but it gets easier. Yet there is more to this debate than our conscience. Yet I will argue the main scriptural reason why abortion is wrong is found in Genesis 9:6. If any man takes a human life, that person's life will also be taken by human hands. The reason is very simple. It's in the last part of the verse. For God made human beings in His own image. This is the reason why all of us should rethink abortion. The reason why we don't kill is because man was made in the very image of God. That is what separates mankind from the rest of the animal kingdom. What exactly does that mean? I will develop. To me, this is the primary view of why abortion is wrong according to the scriptures. Before I tackle that, I want to address a few references and then build my case. Actually, Exodus chapter 21 verses 22 and 23, I encourage you to watch my other video, Take on this verse head on. Basically, is abortion permissible according to the Bible? So I will leave a link for that. So let's go to the next reference. The next reference is Leviticus chapter 18 verse 21. Do not permit any of your children to be offered as a sacrifice to Moloch. The image of Moloch was a human figure with a bull's head and in outstretched arms ready to receive children destined for sacrifice. The image of metal was heated red hot by a fire kindled within, and the children they laid on its arms rolled off into a fiery pit below. In order to drown out the cries of the victims, flutes were played and drums were beaten. A mother stood by without tears or sobs to give the impression of their voluntary impression that it basically didn't bother them. Now, critics will claim that no one gets an abortion today is crying out to some God, and some don't even believe that there is a God, so why even bring up this passage? Well, for one good reason. What the children of Israel did in the worship of their false god wasn't just idolatrous, but the worst form of child abuse to children that have already been born. Abortion, on the other hand, can be viewed as the worst form of child abuse to the unborn. In both of these examples, the worship of a false god and abortion, there's a premeditated harm to a child, and that is the issue. So, here I'm going to go and give my case for the unborn according to the scriptures. However, what is God's view of the unborn child? Once we see a basic overview of His personal involvement and His relationship to the unborn, as well as what does the image of God mean in creation of a child, then we can determine if abortion is permissible or forbidden and why. So, why should most abortions be condemned according to the scriptures? Number one, God's personal involvement. Consider this passage from Job chapter 10 verse 10. Hast thou now poured me out as milk and curdled me like cheese? Notice the personal pronouns. Hast thou now poured me out as milk? This speaks of the way a woman gets pregnant. When the semen is first ejaculated, it comes out as a gel, which gradually turns to liquid. If we were to measure how long it takes it to become liquid, it's normally about 20 minutes. This gel, from us guys, could not travel very far, but in a liquid form, it can travel about 9 miles, which is needed to reach the egg. In the Hebrew, the word pour means, quote, to flow forth. By implication, liquefy. So the very thing we know today was spoken of in the book of Job. So stage 1, the sperm meets the egg. The gel turns into a liquid and literally flows like milk to meet the egg. Yet the second part of this passage talks about like cheese. If you think of it, when you curdle cheese, it means to separate or cause to separate into curds or lumps. That one cell at conception will then separate into 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc., and thus what some will call a clump of cells. After this, the cell will begin to be grouped into different groups of cells, and like an orchestra, will develop the skin, the flesh, the bones, and muscles without missing a beat. Now, check this out from another translation. You formed me inside my mother like cheese formed from milk. You dressed me with skin and flesh. You sewed me together with bones and muscles. Remember, this is from Job chapter 10, verses 10 and 11. When a doctor is doing a major surgery, there are strict rules which are involved in the way the procedure is to be done. The proper sterilization of the equipment is very important. The assurance that nothing from the outside can tamper with the operation in any way are some key factors. So God is personally involved in the development of the children as a master surgeon. If a doctor demands, and rightfully so, strict guidelines for an operation, then by what authority, according to the scriptures, does anyone have the right to compromise the authorized personnel-only room known as the womb to be tampered with? If abortion was meant to be an option in family planning, then why did God go through so much trouble making the womb a restricted area for the baby to grow? Who authorized man to tamper with what only God is authorized to do, involved in according to the principles found in His Word? This is not the only account of the formation process. Psalms chapter 139, verses 13 through 16. I'm going to show the King James version of these passages and then take the literal meaning in the Hebrew of key words and then paraphrase what these passages are revealing. Beginning in verse 13, for thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. So let's begin to break this down. For thou hast possessed, that word possess means to create. So God creates, and notice what is the first mention. This shows the emphasis on the unseen, which is the image of God. Next, my reins. That word reins in the Hebrew means literally inner self, which includes the mind and not of the physical, but the inner parts of the person. And thus that which is not physical is meant here. It also means figuratively the mind as the interior self. So King David begins by saying that God created his inner self. The inner self is then clothed, or as the text states, covered by something. So what does the verse say? Thou hast covered. But in the Hebrew it means to entwine as a screen, by implication to fence in, cover over, protect. This is why one must rethink the mindset of abortion. If one's clothes are caught on fire, we may roll ourselves on the ground and put out the fire. Though our clothes may be destroyed, we hopefully should be okay. The clothes are not the real you, but they do cover or protect you. Our body is simply our clothes that covers that which always remains, and that is our inner self. Next, the text states, in my mother's womb. Then in verse 14, notice the personal pronouns. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works that my soul knoweth. Verse 15, my substance, hence basically the body, was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought. I was woven together. It actually means embroider, by implication to fabricate, in the lowest parts of the earth. Verse 16, thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect. In the Hebrew it speaks of the early stages of life in the womb, but notice it is a personal mass and not just a mass. A wrapped and uninformed mass as in the embryo. That's what it is in the Hebrew. By the way, just as Genesis states that the earth was without form and void, thy book all my members were written. Yet, even though there was none of them, as the text says. Second, look at the personhood of the unborn. Personhood was declared 3,000 years before it became an issue in our courts today. The view of personhood, according to King David, still stay in Psalms chapter 139, verses 13 through 16. Yet the core argument by abortion rights advocates is that the unborn are not a person. But even the Supreme Court agreed that if the fetus can be proven to be a person, then the case for elective induced abortion is over. Quote, if this suggestion of personhood is established, the appellate case, of course, collapses. For the fetus' right to life would be guaranteed. And by what? The Constitution, folks. Now, I want to read from the New Living Translation and notice the emphasis on the personhood, 11 personal pronouns in a few verses. 3,000 years ago, King David nailed it. Even the first two verses that I have already discussed from the book of Job uses 4 personal pronouns. So let's look at personhood from Psalms 139 verses 13 through 16. Starting with verse 13. You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. Whew. I believe King David said that on purpose, and these scriptures foresaw the debate of personhood 3,000 years before it would even happen. That is part of God's view, but there's more. So many focus only on the physical development of the body, which is only the tent. It is the real you inside the tent that matters the most to God. The passage in John where it states the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, but in the Greek it literally means to tabernacle. Thus it could be translated that the Word, meaning Jesus, became flesh and set up his tent, referring to his body. Third point I want to bring out is the image of God. Jesus said, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. It is not our body, but our spirit that is made in the image of God. That is why to state that the unborn child is just a clump of cells is misleading. This is only a part of you. The key to remember is the value that God places on his image. Jesus compared the value of many sparrows to that of a man. He also gave the value to a Roman coin because it had Caesar's image on it. Eagle eggs have great value, and if you destroy them, you will suffer the consequences of that. Our value to God is not based on our development or our making of our tent being the body or function of such, but at the exact moment during conception, we become an eternal spirit being created in the very image of God. The problem is only God truly values a person from a proper perspective. And because of that perspective, he has declared his eternal value even if others don't. So when one sees a picture of a fetus that's only a few weeks old, it appears not to be the image of God, but it is. Yet, It is, for you should never judge a book by its cover. Thus we should never judge a fetus by what we see, but that which is not seen. If a bird can be protected for who they are, even if they're still in an egg, then how much more is an unborn child that already has been created in the very image of God? Thus, we then can conclude that the unborn child should not be killed because of who they are. Thus, which is greater, a bird or one that has been created in the image of God? The image of God is the same whether someone as an unborn or a baby, a week old, or you and I today. 1 Samuel 16 verse 7 says, But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth outward appearance, but God looketh on the heart. Though in the womb we are an eternal spirit created in the image of God first, we have a soul and live in a body. So you reside as a spirit, soul, and body in a temporary shelter called the womb. Once the body is developed enough, then the baby will begin the birthing process. It is at that time that the separation of the unborn from the mother happens. Abortion, on the other hand, is the unauthorized separation of that temporary shelter. Think of it like a car accident in which the car gets totaled. Just as the car no longer will function and fulfill its purpose as it was created to do so, so the function of that person will no longer continue. How can someone who is pro-choice disregard God's intimate involvement in their own development when they were in the womb, which includes a divine purpose and destiny, and then choose to have no regard for the unborn who are now in the very place of vulnerability that they once were? God, the very one that worked so hard to make you in the womb with the purpose and destiny, will be insulted by abortion because it is selfishness of his creation, who, although would not exist without him, have no consideration for others who are now in the very place they used to be. Ecclesiastes 11:5 from the 11:5 says this: God's ways are mysterious as the pathway of the wind, as the manner in which a human spirit is infused into a little body of a baby while yet in its mother's womb. This should bring us back to the formation progress. The word entwine means of two or more things to twine together, as spoken of in Psalms 139. Remember, thou hast covered or entwined me in my mother's womb. I want you to consider the following. First of all, we are an eternal spirit being that is infused or entwined with the soul and the body. I believe this happens at conception. Why? Well, Psalms 51 verse 5, Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Since it is the soul that sins, animals are not sinners like men are, King David states that in sin my mother conceived me. So during conception, the spirit and soul are infused in the new body, and since King David said, in sin did my mother conceive me, then at conception the spirit is infused with the spirit, with the soul and body. So to kill a fetus is to destroy not just a clump of cells, but to destroy the precious entwining of the unborn spirit, soul, and body. Notice what the Apostle Paul stated in 1 Thessalonians 5:23. Now may the God of peace make you holy in every way, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless until our Lord Jesus Christ comes again. Then notice what the author of the book of Hebrews states, Hebrews 4:12. Popular verse, but listen from the Amplified and listen carefully because you will see how it applies to the topic of abortion. For the word that God speaks is alive and fully powerful, making it active, operative, energizing, and effective. It is sharper than any two-edged sword, penetrating to the dividing line of the breath of life, the soul, the immortal spirit, and of the joints and marrow of the deepest parts of our nature, exposing and shifting and analyzing and judging the very thoughts and purposes of the heart. God knows where the dividing line is between our spirit, soul, and body. Thus, that would mean that He knows how to entwine them together that not even the most skilled doctor can do. Have you ever considered what some DNA may be called as junk might be that which creates and develops the invisible aspect of what makes us human? In fact, Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31, it speaks of the rich man in hell. His body was already dead, but his spirit and soul were very much aware and in torment. His reality was not based solely on having a body that was alive, yet what his experience was real. A person can't see electricity, but it can cause havoc when used improperly. A person cannot see the unseen damage an abortion does, but God does. Second, God also has a destiny for all. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you and approved of you as my chosen instrument. And before you were born, I separated and set you apart, concentrating you, and I appointed you as a prophet to the nation. Notice that God knew you before you were formed in the womb with a purpose and destiny. Have you considered the possibility that you are a spirit being? We're waiting for the right body to be infused in. Just a thought to consider. Finally, abortion is not just the killing of a mass or a clump of cells, but the willful degrading and dishonoring of the very image of God. I want to talk about what I call the reverse of God's creative order. Abortion not only kills the child, but attempts to override the creative order of God. God is a God of order. For even in the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, there are three persons in one. God the Father is the head of the Trinity, but the Son and the Holy Spirit are equal to the Father, but their roles are different. There is no way this restricts Jesus or the Holy Spirit in His teaching or saving souls or miracles, but it just shows that God is a God of order. Now, in 1 Timothy chapter 2, the Apostle Paul dealt with the great error in the church. Though both men and women are equally created in the image of God, there still needs to be order. That is why man is the head in the home, even as God the Father is head over Christ. In God's creative order, as well as in biology, the man decides what is best, even as the sperm from the father determines the sex of the child. Yet, in the city of Ephesus, there was a following cult of Artemis called Diana in the King James, which believed that the women were supreme and even would make men captive and would also kill men to their liking. I believe that is a part of what the Apostle Paul said, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor usurp authority over the man, 1 Timothy 2:12. See, there was a particular type of error that he was referring to that had a connection to this topic. The word translated usurp authority actually means someone guilty of killing his or her own flesh and blood. So the error that the Apostle Paul dealt with is not necessarily referring to whether a woman can have a place of teaching or authority in the church, but that which usurps the proper God-given authority of man. Though some will say, but we don't worship those idols today, but it's still the same spirit of error with the same intentions as a wolf in sheep's clothing. In fact, the Supreme Court has declared that the ancient error of the cult of Artemis is backed up by the Constitution according to the court's decision. Quote, that the woman's right is absolute and that she is entitled to terminate her pregnancy at whatever time, in whatever way, and for whatever reason she alone chooses. End quote. Those involved in the heresy of pro-choice are allowing the woman to usurp the authority over the man and to fulfill someone guilty of killing his or her own flesh and blood. So not only is abortion murder, tampering with that which is restricted by God, but attempts to usurp the very creative order of God. What is so amazing to me, the 1 Timothy passage, is Paul's answer to this woman was of having a child. God had made all the provision necessary to every child he creates. It is man that in some cases has robbed the child of those necessities, but in abortion, the unborn child has been robbed of the very chance to live. To those women who have had an abortion, God is there to forgive you and love you through the pain of regret. Though we can't take back what was done, we can break the chain of this mindset and allow the mindset of Christ to form that will produce fruit that can give life to all that partake it. Finally, God has placed His call on each of our lives. As a Christian, once we know without a shadow of a doubt what our purpose is to which we are called to, we handle it with care. The very conception of our call, allow God to completely form that call. Be careful not to thwart the call, but try to have patience until the birthing of our call. Continue to take care of your call, in which someday you will be able to reproduce that call in others. Finally, here's some wisdom on why we should rethink the mindset of abortion. We see like a blur out pictures, yet God sees it clear as day. Ecclesiastes 3:11. Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end.